Diane Ravitch is the president and co-founder of the Network for Public Education. She's an historian of education and research professor at New York University. Diane blogs at dianeravitch.net, and her blog is close to surpassing 36 million hits. She has written 11 books, including her latest book, Slaying Goliath. We are honored tonight to have as Diane's guest Jitu Brown. Jitu is the National Director for the Journey for Justice Alliance, a network of 30 grassroots community-based organizations in 23 cities across the country. They organize for community-driven school improvement. Born and raised in the Rosemore neighborhood on the far south side of Chicago, Jitu Brown led the hunger strike at Diet High School that not only drew national attention, but resulted in a neighborhood keeping its school. Jitu leads the We Choose Alliance, which fights for equitable community-run neighborhood schools for all students. And he is a critical leader of community in this most important moment. Welcome, Jitu. Welcome, Diane.
Thank you so much, Carol. Jitu, when we planned this, we had no idea we were going to be in the midst of what may be one of the most critical moments in American history. And you are a major player in this moment, given your prominence in the African-American community. And I know right up until the minute we went live, we had to delay the opening because the media was calling you and calling you and calling you, and you told us a horrifying story before we went live. So I know you have a lot to say, and I think we're very fortunate to have you and to know you as our friend and someone that we trust and someone whose voice needs to be heard nationally. So thank you so much for joining us. And let's start off by saying, what are you thinking right now, other than what am I doing here?
Well, first, I just want to say thank you to Carol, MP, and Diane. I'm lucky to have you all as friends in this work and the work to build a better world. I'm be honest, I'm just COVID-19 and its impact on my community has, created a sense of urgency to hold America to task for just deep smothering, life snuffing inequities. I have friends that caught COVID. I have family members that have passed as a result of COVID. I have friends who went to the hospital, they weren't believed, had sent back home, went to the hospital, weren't believed, sent back home, and died. And I think COVID exposed a lot of the inequities that we walk with every day. We understand that the issues in public education in the Black community have nothing to do with teachers. It has nothing to do with inner city children. It has everything to do with a system that refuses to be equitable, that still believes, as the Dred Scott decision said many years ago, that a Black man has no rights that the white man is bound to respect. Unfortunately, with the vicious murder of George Floyd, I think coupled with the trauma of being locked in our homes and having curfews and not having access to resources, I think our communities have just exploded. And there are many people who have become very critical of the protesters, critical of the people that are looting stores. And my response to them is that our existence has been looted for 400 years. And where was the outrage then? Where was the outrage? It's amazing to me that people organized with passion, consistency, and fervor to end Michael Vick's football career over dogs. but Black people can be murdered in cold blood. We watched a grandfather strangled in New York, a grandpa strangled in New York, a family man that had so little regard for his life that they choked the life out of him right there on YouTube. But what I think my friends don't often understand is that we walk with that pain every day. My earliest interaction with the police, I was 10 years old on the south side of Chicago. Me and my friends were playing, during those days, you know, when you couldn't afford to buy a bike, you would assemble all your parts in the garage and you and your friends would make bikes, right? You would put new seats on your bike and stuff like that. And I was 10, my friend David was 10, and my friend Keith was 9. And my friend Keith lit a firecracker. And all of a sudden, we're in his garage doors open and we're right by the alley, and the police roll on us. They put a gun right to my mouth. And they put a gun to my friend's head, and he urinates on himself. And that memory, I'll never forget that for the rest of my life. And I've got several other stories. And people that look like me have stories like that that come from cities and neighborhoods like mine, where our dignity is not respected, where our humanity is not respected. But I want to say this, and I'm saying this with, and I'm being as honest as I am, and I'm saying this with love to everybody on this phone, on this call. It's not my job to convince white people of my humanity. It's the job of those who consider themselves anti-racist to do the work. Like this, and this shows you that it can't go back to the way it was. What must come from this is an America that hurls itself forward. The excuses that we've made, the rationalizations that we've made for lives in some communities that are vastly different than the lives of many of the brothers and sisters that are on this call. We've rationalized, we've made excuses, we've turned the other eye. And then as we work in coalition together, I want you to know that those screams for justice are inside of me every day of my existence. I have an 11-year-old son that I am terrified for because I view America as a wolf that preys on us. And it has never stopped. We have never stopped being lynched in this country. And I think that officer laid on that man's neck to let it sear in our spirits. There's no escape. There's nowhere to turn. And the question is, what will you do? Not to save us, because I don't need anybody to save me, but to save this country. Because as you see now, you see young people openly confronting police because they realize that those police are not there for them. And they've never been there for them. Yes, there are good police officers. My brother-in-law is a police officer. A young man that I raised, Pierre Williams, became a police officer. We want police like that, but we are tired of SUVs full of white men patrolling our communities and beating us at their will because they know that America thinks we're animals anyway. But I want to share with you this. What civilizations have we destroyed? What millions of people have we murdered? What did we do to Native Americans? We have to look at ourselves honestly and have the courage to face what America really is. It'll never change if we don't do that. I want you to understand, I have an 11-year-old, brilliant little boy. Brilliant little boy. Lights up the room when he walks in. I am terrified for him because I know, not an hypothesis, not my opinion, I know that if this country can kill him, they will. So you all excuse me. I'm in a, you know, we have something else happening in Chicago, where Mexican families in the communities of Little Village and Pilsen have started randomly pulling Black people out of cars and beating them up. shooting them, smashing car windows, beating up grown women that are just trying to go to the grocery store. There's a savagery to the racism that exists in this country that we have not had the courage to confront.
Jitu, do you think anything will change as a result of demonstrations all over the country? Tens of thousands, maybe hundreds, I don't know if it's hundreds of thousands. Every place in this country, there are thousands of people out in the street.
I think what has to change is our acceptance of a no. That has to change, because we're gonna get a no. So what we're doing around the country is we're organizing a set of demands around being able to bring federal charges on police officers when they kill one of us, around restructuring what local police districts look like, having racially equitable representation in those police departments, police officers having to be vetted around their views on race, having to understand communities, so we're making demands like this. So Diane, I will say to you that with all the breath I have in my body, we're not going to accept anything less. But I would say that to everybody that's watching this today, if you are passive, if you do not make it part of your life work to eradicate racism, then you are part of the problem. Because we don't have the ability to be racist. We don't control institutions. We don't control school curriculum. We don't control how police departments operate. We don't control housing policy. We don't control whether people can get businesses in our community. All of us must become warriors against racism. It is America's biggest sickness. It's not greed. It is racism. It is the fact that if you are not white, you are viewed as less. It is whiteness. And I don't mean white people. I don't mean people that are racialized as white. I mean the sense that being white affords you something better and it makes other people less. You must wage war against that. There's nowhere else to look. There's nowhere to run. There's nowhere to turn. Just like I don't have anywhere to turn, just like the grocery store on the end of my block is in flames, is gone. Just like we're trying to find ways to feed, so we don't have any choice but to band together, feed each other, take care of each other. The same thing for you all, for all of us. None of us have, so Diane, what will change is what we make change. What we make change. You mentioned the diet hunger strike. Everybody told us we couldn't beat Rahm Emanuel, one of the strongest Democrats in the country. But the men and women that I sat in that circle with, we made a decision that we were not who they said we were, that we were greater than who they said we were, and we waged war against Rahm Emanuel and his policies. Now sustainable community schools are spreading across the country, and they would not have happened without the process we did in envisioning a school community for the Diet High School community. So I believe that there is nothing we can't do. There is nothing we can't do. All you need to make change is time, space, and will. Time, space, and will. I'm a firm believer in that. So yes, Diane, I believe there'll be a change because we are going to dedicate the rest of our lives to it. But I think there's a calling for all of you, my MPE friends. There's a calling for you. There's a calling. And because we can at least see each other, like 20 years ago, me and Diane Ravitch would have never been on the same committee.
It's true.
Right? That just
right.
This wouldn't have happened because but the universe has moved in a way that has brought us together. And I believe that we are brought together to do something much greater than just a piece of education policy. Because this thing don't need to be tweaked, it needs to be transformed. And so,
well, Jitu,
yes,
let me say, we appreciate your wisdom and your leadership. And I know that you're very courageous because we've seen that in Chicago and elsewhere in the country. And I think that your guidance is very important to us. And I think right now we're at a potential critical moment in American history where there are people in the streets everywhere in this country. Small communities, big cities, they're out in the streets and they're demanding justice.
Yes, ma'am.
So we have a couple of obstacles, maybe more than a couple. And the first is that we have a president, we have a Senate that really doesn't care and that would like to keep everything exactly as it is. How do we change that?
Well, I can offer my thoughts on it. I mean, I don't pretend to have all the answers, but what I will say is that the Democratic Party has taken the votes of Black people for granted for decades. If you go to any ghetto, like any bombed out ghetto, if you go to Detroit, you go to Baltimore, if you go to Philadelphia, if you go to South Side, West Side of Chicago, they're governed by Democrats. So I think the way we change it is that we raise the bar for those that claim to be on our side. Because we are if we do that together, like if equitable education in low-income communities is as important to people on this call as it is to me, if stopping school closings is as important to people on this call as it is to me, if just like I will stand side by side with white parents that care about testing, and you all know, I mean, my history, you all know that I do and I have, then likewise, then what happens is these Democrats have nowhere to hide. And you will inspire a base that is pretty much assumed that you don't care. By you, I mean the Democratic Party. So when Donald Trump won in 2012, when Donald Trump won, he got less votes than Mitt Romney got in 2012. So it's not that he's built a movement, in my humble opinion. It's that the Democratic Party has failed to meet the needs of the people that its rhetoric says it cares about. And so, to me, Diane, that's what we have to inspire the base. We can't inspire the base for what you're talking about with rhetoric, with slogans, with sound bites. We have to realize, I'll give an example. I was talking to a group of organizers in Buffalo, New York, right? And nice woman raised her hand and she said, I enjoyed your presentation, but why do you always talk about race? Everything isn't about race. And I smiled and I said, well, I have a question. We're gonna do a little social experiment. I said, so the room was pretty much white and Black, maybe a few Latinx folks, but maybe 60% white. I said to all my white friends, raise your hand. Answer these questions. How many of you have never had to deal with a slumlord? You grew up with decent housing. They raised their hand. Most of them raised their hand. I said, how many of you all had decent schools in your neighborhood? You know, you had science labs. You were able to learn a world language. You had a teacher aide in the classroom if you needed one. You had a counselor if you needed one. Most of them raised their hand. I said, how many of you all have a grocery store in your neighborhood? The liquor store, the corner liquor store ran by a merchant from outside of your community is not your grocery store. Most of them raised their hand. I said, how many of you all have a hospital that you can go to? Most of them raised their hand. And I asked a simple question. I said, how many of you all had to do a sit-in to get it? How many of you all had to get arrested to get it? And as a community organizer, my understanding of how you build community by investing in the basic quality of life institutions in those neighborhoods: housing, education, food production and delivery systems, clothing, healthcare. Just, you know, the United Nations says those are the 5 basic institutions. You kill a community by starving it of those institutions. So that's what school closings is all about. School closings, in connection with the loss of affordable housing, has purged Black people out of urban spaces. And so those same people who go to work every day, like my dad did in the steel mills and came home with burns on his arm, My mother, after the steel mills closed, and my mom worked sometimes 2 and 3 jobs to make sure, and my dad pumped gas, took me to the gas station with him. To Americans, people that are supposed to be American, that work hard every day like that, the return on our investment is supposed to be stable institutions in our community. That is not a handout. That is not the race card. That is what every American, and many Americans don't even think twice about it. But for what you all gonna say, I had to starve. We had to starve ourselves 34 days for a neighborhood school. To say that this school would be state of the art and that our children were just as beautiful as anybody else's, we had to starve our bodies. Irene Robinson was hospitalized twice and they could care less. So to me, that's how we transform our communities. There has to be a commitment to make sure that every person in this country that pays taxes deserves and has a right to access to basic quality of life institutions that allow them to make a life for themselves. But if your baby goes to school and they're in kindergarten getting suspended, if your baby goes to school and there's no world language, so they don't even get they think they're minorities. They don't realize that in Brazil, most of the people look just like them. Some of the original people in China look just like them. They don't even get to build a worldview. They're robbed of that. Instead of having counselors, they've got police officers in their schools.
So Jitu, has the Chicago public schools changed as a result of Rahm leaving and Lori Lightfoot taking over as mayor?
Well, I would say this. The CEO of Chicago, first, the fact that we have a CEO is a problem, right? Instead of a superintendent, it's a problem. But Janice Jackson is the most qualified person we've had in that position. They're talking the right talk. They're talking about equity. They're using the language. But there's still a lot of things that are problematic. In my humble opinion, government cannot set the mandate or the metrics for equity. It has to come from the people, right? It has to come from the people that are directly impacted. So I will say that Lori Lightfoot has a lot of progressive rhetoric, but a lot of conservative leanings. She does not operate as a progressive. It's easy to talk civil rights instead of live civil rights. And so, no, I don't think there's been a lot of changes in Chicago public schools. I mean, we intend to change it. We intend to make the change. But no, I don't think there's been a lot of change, Diane, for the better. I think, for example, I think Janice Jackson, if her politics were tight, if her politics were in order, she would be a phenomenal CEO or superintendent. I worked with her for 7 years when she was a teacher. She was an amazing teacher. When she became principal of a school on the west side of Chicago, she asked me to come and do a rites of passage program. I did it there for 6 years, teaching young men about their history and helping them grow and develop. So we were friends at one time. We're not anymore. She doesn't return my calls anymore, but that's okay. But, you know, it's not about, like, she comes from the inner city, but it's not about where you come from. It's about who you serve, who you hear, who you recognize, whose voices do you validate. So, you know, you all may remember a couple of years ago in Chicago, they closed all the high schools in the Inglewood community. We told them don't do it. We fought against it. We fought with the schools to save them. We were able to win a phase-out process as opposed to an outright closing. And we're going to get at least one of those schools reopened. But then they opened this state-of-the-art school, and then they piled all the children from this huge community with 76,000 people in it. They piled all the students into one school, and the school exploded. Just like, if you know the story of Diane High School, when they closed Inglewood, when Arnie Duncan closed Inglewood High School in 2006, and then they parceled out the children from Inglewood to 4 different neighborhood high schools. All those high schools had spikes in violence. So my thing is, you know, if you make the mistake, if you make the same mistake over and over again, what they say, do the same thing over and over again and expect a different result. That's the definition of insanity. So no, Diane, a lot hasn't changed. A lot of the rhetoric has changed, but the core value systems have not. The core value system has not changed. I
was in Washington a couple of years ago, and it was an event at the Washington Post, and Rahm was being interviewed, and then Janet Jackson was interviewed, and she couldn't stop praising him enough. So that's the only time I ever saw her or heard her. And since I have an extremely low opinion of Rahm Emanuel, I was not very happy to hear her praising him, but she was like a lapdog. And Rahm was talking about he might be the next Secretary of Education. And I thought, this is the man who closed 50 public schools in one day and harmed,
stroke of a pen,
hurt children, hurt families, hurt communities. He shouldn't be allowed anywhere near education.
He shouldn't. He actually, in my humble opinion, he shouldn't be allowed anywhere near public life. What I mean by that, he shouldn't be allowed to be on anybody's talk show. You know, you see him on CNN all the time now. He's like this darling pundit. In addition to the 50 schools, I want to remind people that when a police officer shot a teenager 16 times, like that's
Laquan McDonald, right?
He shot Laquan McDonald 16 times. I mean, you know, sometimes we hear things so insane that we get numb to it. But I want to say that again. This police officer pumped 16 bullets into a child. Not only did the police cover it up, but Rahm Emanuel covered it up.
He didn't allow the video out.
He wouldn't allow the video released because he was running against Chuy Garcia for mayor, and he was concerned, and rightfully so, that if the video came out, he would lose. But to me, that tells you, you know, there's an old, you know, they say values are beliefs that govern your behavior. What you believe is what you do, not what you say. What you believe is what you do. That lets you know his level of value for people that were different from him. And so to me, not only should he be in jail, he should not be allowed to be on anybody's talk show circuit. But the fact that he is, despite the fact that it's widely known what he did, right? The New York Times wrote about it, tells you, excuse me, sorry, guy on a motorcycle riding by, tells you that racism is not just an affliction of a few. It is woven into the DNA of this country. And so just like people elected Donald Trump, despite the fact that they knew about the Central Park Five, despite the crimes he committed against women, despite the racism he showed against Black and brown folks that were trying to get housing, despite what he said he would do to women, you know, I mean, that lets you know that the moral fiber in this country is rotting, because people were willing to elect him in some cases because of what he did. At the best case scenario, in spite of what he did. So
Jitu, when we were waiting to go on, you said a few things about white men, young white men who were infiltrating demonstrations. And I have a post coming out on my blog tomorrow about something that you may know about. It's called the Boogaloo Movement. Have you ever heard of that?
No, ma'am.
Well, I went to Wikipedia because I heard of it. A couple of people mentioned it to me. And it's actually a movement of white supremacists who want to create a race war. And if you go to Wikipedia and look it up, it's Bougaloo. And the Boogaloo Movement are these racist and white supremacists who infiltrate other organizations in order to foment violence. And I wonder if you see any of this in terms of what's happening around the country. I can tell you of two things, and then I'll let you sound off. One, in Nashville, somebody set fire to the historic Metro Nashville courthouse, and they arrested, because they had a photograph, they had video of the man doing it, a 25-year-old white guy. Then in Minneapolis, The first incident of looting was a white guy dressed head to toe in black wearing a gas mask so you couldn't see his face. He was carrying a hammer and he walked along an AutoZone shop and just went bam, 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 knocked out every window and walked away. They call him the umbrella man. He was wearing a gas mask, carrying an umbrella, but he was on video because, you know, they're video.
Yeah. Well, no, I appreciate that.
He's not
I
a
don't.
peaceful protester.
Yes, ma'am. Well, you know what, Diane? So I don't know, Carol, if somebody can send me that or send that, the Boogaloo Movement. If you could send that to me.
I'll send it to you.
Okay.
It's called Boogaloo. And
Boogaloo.
these are white supremacists.
Okay.
These are white supremacists who would like, they actually want to destroy all of government, but they especially, they think they can do it by setting off a race war. So they're jumping into this movement. A lot of them have become involved in this movement. They pretend to be concerned about George Floyd, but what they really want to do is to discredit the protest.
Absolutely. So I will tell you what we've observed. So Journey for Justice, we've grown a little bit since the bio. We are in 36 cities. We also have member organizations in Johannesburg and in Puerto Rico. And what people are telling me, first, let me tell you what I witnessed. Last Saturday, there was a big rally in Chicago, at least 50,000 people in downtown Chicago. It was so big that it was just so many people that I didn't recognize. I laid in the back. I parked my truck on the street, and I leaned on my truck along with my son, and I just watched because I wanted to see kind of observe what was really going on. And I saw three different, and I'm sure there were more, but what I saw was three different streams of young, athletically built white men wearing all black, and they moved in formations of 7 to 10. And they would come, many of them had backpacks, and they would come and get in the crowd. Some of them had skateboards in their backpacks or baseball bats. And then they would pull out really inflammatory signs, and then they were the ones that when we started the march, folks saw them set fire to a police car and start busting out windows. So I mentioned this on a call with Journey for Justice Alliance members, and everybody immediately started talking about what they saw. And so here's what we know. In Chicago, Minneapolis, Philadelphia, Newark, Camden, New York City, Oakland, Los Angeles, Detroit, Milwaukee, New Orleans, I'm forgetting somewhere, but at least those cities identified the same type of folk, including the formations they moved in, how they dressed, and I'm sure there are more folks than that, right? To create that type of damage, you know, I'm sure there are more folks, and I'm sure that some of the infiltrators look just like us. You know, they're black, right? Now, so one of the things that one of my mentors taught me a long time ago, he said that one of the ways that you can spot an agent or an infiltrator is that they will always propose violent escalation. And I've experienced that at the local level with a group called Voices of the Ex-Offenders, who tried to derail our efforts to stop school closings. And these were black men who claimed to work on the right of work for those who have been formerly incarcerated. And so I've experienced that. I've experienced a guy come up to me and tell me that we should defend ourselves and that they had rifles. And then when we resisted it, they actually attacked us. And we had to, you know, pretty much show them that you know, you're not talking to children, you're talking to grown men. And we got them off of us, but they were definitely trying to derail us. And that same principle, I think, applies itself to huge demonstrations like this.
Well, it just occurred to me as strange that somebody would come to a peaceful protest with a hammer or use a skateboard as a weapon. Yeah. And I saw that in the videos. And
we're even hearing that, you know, Diane, we're even hearing that a lot of the men and the people that I told you earlier about Mexican men jumping on black people, that a lot of them were paid. Now, we don't know by who, and I don't want to be conspiratorial, but that is what a lot of people are coming back to us saying, because we are holding, you know, those communities accountable, saying you have to get your people. And they're out there doing violence interruption and things of that nature, but we're hearing that. And I think it's important because there's a lot of profit in the status quo. You know, if you look at the list of American companies that make products in American prisons, it's a long list, right? And so I think there's a lot of profit in poverty and pain. And to change the status quo would mean that there would have to be a level of power sharing. So this is what I mean by us standing with each other, not ceremoniously, but standing with each other. You know, Ella Baker said, until the killing of black men, black mothers' sons is as important as the killing of white men, white mothers' sons. We who believe in freedom will not rest until it comes. And so I believe in my heart, that's what's required. There is no more passive allyship. That does us no good. It does us no good.
So before we started, went on the air, you were telling us the story of a woman who's a funeral home director. Tell that story.
Yes, ma'am. So, a young woman named Tanika Tate, who is a funeral home director, was in the car with her family, several of her cousins. They were going to a mall called Brickyard Mall because she's doing so many funerals as a result of COVID. She hadn't had time to go shopping. So she finally had a day to go shopping on Sunday. Brickyard Mall is like a large mall on the northwest side of Chicago. And they didn't realize that the mall was closed. So they pull into the parking lot. The police speed by them or speed towards them. They pull over so that the police can get by. And before you know it, a mob of police officers run up to their car and start yelling, "Get the F out the car." And they're banging on the window till they smash the window. The cars over, yank the woman out by her hair, slam her to the ground, smashed the windows on the other side of the eye and cut up the eye of the other woman, slammed her to the ground, slammed her nephew to the ground, impounded the car, never told them of a charge. One of the women had to be hospitalized. And then they took the woman that was hurt and wouldn't tell them where they took her. So they couldn't find her for 8 hours. And you see on the video that the officer has his knee on the neck of one of the women. And I want to say this. And I'm saying this out of love, and I'm saying this out of resolution. White men putting their hands on black women need to stop. There's a history of the brutalized lost their right, many historically lost their rights, the right to choose who they want to have babies with. They've been murdered, raped, lynched, and that has never stopped. And so for grown men to feel that they have the right to grab women and snatch and slam them on the ground and brutalize them. So tomorrow we're having we're gonna share the video, and we're asking all of you to share it every way you can, because we're gonna hold Chicago police, but they got the wrong ones with this. So we're gonna hold them to task tomorrow. But
did they ever
and
get
we have the video? I don't know if we can show it, but we do have the video.
Did they ever get an explanation of why they were stopped, why they were pulled out of their car?
No, they didn't. And when she finally got to the police station and they realized that that's where her relative was, she told the captain. The captain immediately went inside and got her keys, got her car, and said, "You need to file a complaint," and left. That was it.
Jitu, I do have the video ready if you want me to show it now.
Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely. Hold on a second.
Diane, can we show the video?
Absolutely.
All right, let's do it.
Oh, hold on. All right, you guys talk for another second. Oh, no, I do have it up. Here we go. That's the right one. Yeah, Jitu?
Wait, hold on, hold on, hold on.
Jitu, that's
So
really
the young man
horrifying.
that you saw them throw was her nephew, and he was responding because the officer had his knee on the neck of his mom. And yeah. So
What are you going to do? What can you do about this? It's absolutely horrifying.
well, we are actually some part of our team at Kenwood Oakland Community Organization is at Miss Tate's home right now. And they're talking, and we're doing a press conference tomorrow at 10 a.m. That's why the media was calling me, because I sent, like, literally 15 minutes before I got on, I sent out the media alert, and immediately the media started calling. We're going to share the video out. We got her an attorney. She's definitely going to sue the Chicago Police Department, and we're going to make some transformative demands, like Chicago moved to a community policing model, that we want racial equity within the communities that we live with, the officers that walk through our neighborhoods. These, you know, and don't please, as young people, you say, don't get it twisted. They're good police. They're good white police. But the police department and has a culture, and far too many of them are racist. And so what we need to do is we need to transform that department. We need to get people in our community that police our communities, that come from our communities, that look like us, that we're able to vet, and then we have the power to bring charges against. So we need community review boards that review complaints against police, can bring federal charges against police. There is a history in the Black community where the police have never served and protected. It was always about control. It was always about control. Some of the people, when Black cities emerged or Black neighborhoods prospered in this country, many of the forces that helped burn those neighborhoods down were police. So that's just the truth. So if I understand everything correctly, we have never had a relationship where officer friendly was in our neighborhood. It just has not been the culture. And so I think when Diane, you mentioned the fact that people are protesting all over the country, I think we're talking about transformative demands. It's not enough just to convict those officers. And they haven't arrested the other 3 yet, but is it not enough to convict those officers? They need to be convicted right? See, so to me, when I sit on my porch and an SUV, a police SUV drives down the neighborhood, and there's 4 white police officers in it, and they look at me, they don't look at me like, hey, neighbor. They look at me like, what's up, N-word? That's how they look at me. And that is an occupying force in your neighborhood. That's just what it is. And so we have to be courageous enough to say it, to hear it, and then move to change it. And so, but what we're going to do about it, Diane, is we're about to put pressure on the Chicago Police Department. They mess with people that are not afraid to fight back. So that's where we are. And so what would be helpful, again, is really sharing that video in every avenue that you can. Because we're going to, again, we just got the video yesterday. So we're sharing it all throughout our networks. And we're doing, like I said, it's going to be a major news story tomorrow. We're going to try to get national news on it. And we want, you know, and now the mayor is trying to get in front of it, but there's no getting in front of this. We need transformation.
I know that you're going to pursue justice and you're not going to let this go until you get it. But let me just, because I know that we're pushing up on the 8:30, and I'm very concerned that I read a few days ago that somebody put out the news that Rahm Emanuel's advising Joe Biden. And it may be that Rahm Emanuel put that out as a way of promoting himself. But I believe that Joe Biden has a profound debt to African-American people, because he would not be the nominee today were it not for the African-American community in South Carolina. There was a point in the campaign where he had done very poorly in the early primaries. He was running out of money. He had no campaign. And then suddenly he gets endorsed by Congressman Clyburn, and he sweeps the South Carolina primary based on the African-American vote, and he knows that he owes them. And I hope, Jitu, that you will use whatever influence you have to connect to the Biden people and let them know don't let Rahm Emanuel near the education department or near any other department either.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're pushing Randy and Lily Garcia because they're on his education team. We're pushing them to get us, parents and community reps, on that transition team around education. I don't have any personal connections, but we are working with we are pushing this campaign, and we're going to win it. We're going to, just like we did the presidential forum on December 14th, we're going to get a forum with Biden on education. But we're also going to be doing some direct action very soon around why, because there's no guarantee that schools, in particular public schools, are going to come back. There's no guarantee. I mean, if you think about it, schools have been closed now for 6 months, maybe. And it seems like that. I don't know how long it's been, but
since March.
Since March. So who's to say that public schools as we know them will return, especially when that makes teacher unions stronger, especially when that gives, if we push and win the type of schools we know we deserve, that pushes equity for that helps stabilize communities. And if you have stable communities, strong communities, if you have stable teacher unions, strong teacher unions, you have a force against the privatization movement. But if you can destabilize those communities, if you could completely destabilize, weaken, crush teacher unions, who says that somehow morally that they'll come back with school? I don't believe that. And so for us, we believe that we have to start pushing our demands for how school reopens with a loud thump, right? And demand that, because I just have no faith that that people are going to do right. We have to make them do right. So
I agree, and I also believe that schools have to come back because first of all, parents really want their kids in school. They want to be able to go to work, and they can't go to work when their children are at home. And all the guys who own all these companies want the economy to reopen, and it can't reopen when all the kids are at home. However, you can't send children and you can't send teachers and other staff into an unsafe situation. And the only way it's going to be safe is if class size is dramatically reduced. And the only way it's going to be dramatically reduced is if the funding is increased. And every state in this country is talking about cutting the schools because they're the single biggest expense. And Mitch McConnell is saying, I'm not going to help the states. Sorry about that. And that's ridiculous, because if the states don't get money from the federal government, they're going to have 40 kids in a class, and everyone's going to be exposed to the COVID. It's
everybody gets sick. Yeah. And then we'll have another shutdown.
Right.
And I think it's really important. I agree with that 100%, Diane. And I think it's important to note that I think the fury we're seeing with these protests is that the roots of that. We are mad as hell about what happened to George Floyd, and people are sick of it. But I think the fury you see is that people been in quarantine, basically under martial law since March. And I want to make that argument, because we're in martial law right now. I don't know if anybody would argue differently. And I think that I had a friend that debated with me and said, well, you're not in martial law until they suspend habeas corpus. And my point to him that, no, that's a very linear way of looking at a thing. But the spirit of a thing is a thing. And if they can tell you, go in the house, you're in martial law. And what we've seen, this thing move in phases. So what's happened is it's gotten stricter and stricter. I think people are just exploding. So what happens when there's a second outbreak? And so I think, to your point, the way schools look, dramatically reducing class sizes, having community schools where there could be medical clinics in the schools, where you can have more counselors. So you can have, like in public schools in Chicago, the counselor to student ratio is 1 to 350. What if it was 1 to 75? Then what kind of services could young people get if they needed them? If they're hungry, if they need access to food, if they need vision services, if they're homeless and they need stability, these types of things, if you have all these things in place, you can address as they say in Finland, schools can meet the needs of the child instead of the child being forced to meet the needs of school. So I'm paraphrasing. I don't know if I got that right, but you know what I'm saying. So,
Yeah, I know what you're saying. I know
yes,
what
ma'am.
you're saying. And you know what, G2, what I think is one of the great schools in this country, and it's only one, is the school that LeBron James created in Akron, Ohio. And he said, I want the kids who are the neediest kids, I want to meet all their needs, medical, nutrition, social. I want their parents to be able to come here and get help. I want to have a food pantry with no questions asked about who gets what. And he has a full service school and he's supporting it. And then the question arises, why can't we do this for all the kids?
And what I really appreciate is that he said very explicitly, this is not a charter school.
Yes.
He's very explicit. And so you're right. And I think what he did can be a guidepost to other athletes in regards to how you invest. So we're working to get in front of him and his people because we think the vision of sustainable community schools needs very high profile advocates, as well as, very strong organizing on the ground.
Okay, that looks like a good spot. I'm going to turn everything over to Marla right now. We have lots of folks with us here on Zoom and also a bunch of people over on Facebook. So the folks who are with us here on Zoom are desperate to ask some questions of Jitu and Diane. So Marla, I'm going to turn everything over to you.
Thank you. Good evening, Diane. Good evening, Jitu.
Hi, Marla.
All right. We've got lots of questions here. The first one, Jitu, is for you. It's from Betsy Markman. And Betsy says that you mentioned screening police for racial attitudes. How do we do that?
I think Jitu is listening to the media right now.
Yeah.
I don't think he heard your question. Jitu, there was a question for you.
I apologize. I missed it. Can I get it again? I'm sorry.
Hi, Jitu.
Hey, Marla.
We have a question from Betsy Markman. And Betsy says that you mentioned screening police for racial attitudes. How do we do that?
How do we do what?
How do we
screen the police for racial attitudes?
I think it's very important to, and I would say this, they can work with groups like Advancement Project, NAACP, to develop a training for officers around their views on racial issues. Have you spent time around Black people? Have you spent time around brown people? Have you spent time around indigenous people? And other questions that they can ask, do you believe that young Black children are criminals? I don't know what the questions would be, but there has to be a way to work with civil rights organizations to come up with a vetting process, right? You can vet people around their professional experience. You can vet people even around their politics. So you should be able to vet people around their views on racial justice. And I think that is just part of the process. We have a decades-long culture of accepting this perception that when they're coming in our neighborhoods, they're coming in the jungle, right? And that means that the treatment, that perception, just like the perception that Black people were savages, rationalized the truly savage treatment of slavery, right? Of lynchings. So believing that in our communities we are not civilized rationalizes snatching a grown woman out of a car, beating her. So there has to be a way to vet them. And I would lean on groups that have a civil rights policy leaning, like Advancement Project, like NAACP, that can help guide a process like that.
Great. Jitu, our next question comes from Shelley Clark. And Shelley is from Indiana, and she says that she is a white parent and a public education advocate at the local and the state level. She would like to know how to build a strong coalition that is inclusive of the Black community to keep education public and to ensure equity for all students. She said that the forces that they're up against in Indianapolis are very powerful, incestuous, and motivated by profit. They co-opt the language, and their AstroTurf groups serve lunches and dinners. They provide childcare, and they call it parent empowerment. We need to know how to fully engage our Black and Brown communities to succeed in our fight for equity in education and racial justice in America. So her real question is, how do white parents build strong coalitions and be inclusive of the Black community in this advocacy to ensure equity?
So if you're talking about equity, the white community cannot be inclusive of the Black community. It has to be guided by the Black community. And so I would, the reason I'm making that distinction is because those two are very different. So I think that folks that want to organize coalitions, we have a superpower that the AstroTurfs will never do. They'll never do this. What gave us power in the fight for diet is that I personally talked to over 2,000 people in the Bronzeville community. I sat with local school council members, parent advisory council members, parents, young people, people in the community, getting their input respectfully on their vision of what schools could look like. And then I let that vision guide what we developed. Then I went back to them and I reported back. And you know, one of the things that Black and Brown people are not used to are systems or people that are trying to change systems or be in systems to ask us, what do we think, and mean it. I know that sounds crazy, but that's one thing that we're not used to, folks coming and saying, well, how do you think policing should operate? And actually mean it. Actually come back and say, we took your recommendations. Does this reflect what you said? And that's what we did. And when we did it, we built a force of people that were prepared to fight in that community and built a plan that was, you know, a top-notch plan that was for a high school and 6 of its feeder schools. So I recommend that type of process of engaging Black and Brown parents around the 6 pillars of sustainable community schools. What is it that you would like to see? If it, you know, I was talking to parents and I encountered all the doubt in the world. I had parents that said, well, those people are not gonna let us do nothing. Oh, you know, they're just gonna do what they're gonna do. Excuse my slang, my improper English, but those are the things I was hearing. And at one point I had to ask them, I said, look, I said, if it was just you and your God, if you were looking in the mirror and it was just you and your God, what would your dreams be for your baby? And as they began talking, my listening ear, I was putting it under different pillars. And I said, does this reflect what you said? And I'm like, yes. And then we put it together. I come back to them, report. Then I said, we're doing a town hall meeting. Chicago Public Schools does not want to support our plan, but we got the most people. They would show up. And before you know it, we had a neighborhood on fire about saving a high school. We did barbecues. And at the barbecues, we surveyed people. People gave us what they said, what their responses were to the 6 pillars. We included all of that. We listened respectfully and intentionally, and then we moved on what the people said they wanted. And so the reason why the diet fight was so powerful, it was a multiracial fight that was led by the people directly impacted. So white women on the north side of Chicago fought with us because they were confronted with the reality that they knew in their heart that they didn't have to go through this in order to get their schools fixed. So why did they have to go through this? And to their credit, they were honest. And so they stood with us. And so my point being that I think the way you build unity is you start engaging the people of Indianapolis around a vision for public education. And you go in those communities and you don't change what you hear what they say. And it's gonna hurt and some of it's gonna tick you off, but that's okay. You talking to a man that's had so many doors slammed in his face that I'm immune to it now, right? I never take it personally. So I would recommend, that would be my recommendation, that where you know there are folks that have people, you begin to say, you know we can't trust privatizers, so why don't we build our own vision for public education? And you start meeting with block clubs and youth groups and et cetera, And that's how you get that done.
So, Marla, I want to step in and ask Jitu a question. I know I've had lots of chances to ask him questions, but I have one more. And that's I want to just remember the first time I ever talked to you, Jitu. You were on the bus on the journey for justice, and somehow or another we connected. I forget who gave each other the phone number. And I said to you, Jitu, we need you because these guys who are trying to steal our public schools and privatize them are using the language of civil rights.
Yes,
And
ma'am.
we know it's a lie. We know when someone's a billionaire, they're not leading the civil rights movement, but they're talking about saving poor Black and brown children by creating privatized charter schools and giving them vouchers, anything to destroy public education. And we know now that if you have a voice and you have a vote, you have a way to influence the board. You don't have an elected board in Chicago, but most people have an elected board. And these privatizers do whatever they can to take away the part of the board because they don't want communities of color to have elected school boards. And that was our first conversation, is how do you take back the language of civil rights and take it away from billionaires who are not known to be civil rights leaders?
Yes, ma'am. No, I remember that like it was yesterday, and we Journey for Justice Alliance was maybe 12 cities, and we hadn't even named it Journey for Justice yet. We were just on a journey for justice going to DC. And it was, it was important to have, someone, with the history of Diane to reach out and say, I support what you're doing. It's important. And so it was like on a hot day, cool water coming over the top of your head. It was soothing. It was important. And I think, that just, the reason why privatizers can steal the language of the civil rights movement, and I don't mean to be graphic, but the reason they can do this is because they murdered the Black Power and Civil Rights movement. And so since those organizations have been destroyed, those leaders were killed, there's a void. And so we realized that the artistic science and community organizing has been murdered out of Black communities. And so we have to reinvigorate it. But we have to do it not where we look for a charismatic leader, not one Malcolm X, not one Harriet Tubman, but 1,000 Malcolm X's, 10,000 Harriet Tubmans. That's the work we have. And so part of what we do is we build leaders. We build, like, for example, I come from the Kenwood Oakland Community Organization, and I was trained at the Kenwood Oakland Community Organization, Chicago's oldest Black-led grassroots community organizing group. I was trained there to be able to do a journey for justice, right? 10 years ago, I wouldn't have been ready, but I was ready in 2012, 2013. And so, and I came into it as a volunteer. And so, for example, one of our hunger strikers, Jeanette Taylor, is now alderwoman of the 20th Ward in the city of Chicago. She started off as a local school council parent, right? Who was just tired of rubber stamping every proposal that the principal made. And so when she joined the education committee, she learned, she grew, and then she found that agency inside of ourselves. What we need for a better world, regardless of your community, whether you are in upstate New York or whether you're in the inner city of Detroit, Michigan, we need organizations that develop a different type of leader, right? A leader that understands racial justice, economic justice, how to build a better world. The concept of Blackness, right, to my understanding, is a political construct, just like the concept of whiteness is a political construct. And I think we should all be proud of who God made us, but we should struggle for a world that's human. If a human world would not put your knee on a man's neck and take the life out of him, the human world would not care more about dogs than human beings. And I think we have a challenge, but I think we have the opportunity to lay the foundation to build that world. I really do.
Thank you.
Jitu, I know you mentioned the We Choose Coalition, and I know you guys have built that coalition around several very powerful pillars. And I know one of them is very rooted in the school to prison pipeline. And we have a couple questions about that. I know you touched a little bit upon that today, but Eric Joyce and Miriam Escobar would like for you to discuss the place for police in schools. What is your view on that?
Absolutely. I think that there should be no police in schools. I believe that, for every Eric Floyd, right, there was, an assault at another school, where school resource officers cared so little about Black and brown bodies that they would brutalize children. We've seen the videos over and over again. We see the school culture over and over again. Like I said, we have systems in Pittsburgh. They had to organize to stop the suspension of kindergarten through second graders. Who suspends kindergartners, right? And so to me, this piece in Minneapolis where the Minneapolis Board of Education or Minneapolis Public Schools has voted to cancel the contract of the Minneapolis Police Department has the potential to be huge. It could spread all over the country, but we can't pull the cart before the horse because there's no guarantee to see if there's no school in the fall, who cares if the police aren't in the schools? Because now that money that just went to the police just goes to somebody else to steal, right? So if you all understand my point. So I really think it's going to be important for us to demand that public school comes back in the form that we say it should, right? That's important. While we're fighting for police-free schools, I believe that that to me, the two most important developmental programs or cultural infusions that need to happen in schools are a culture of restorative justice and student leadership development. I think young people should be able to connect their lived issues with their educational experience. Project-based learning is a wonderful laboratory for that type of work. So for example, I did a project with students at Diane where their job was first to learn about the situation in Flint, Michigan, and then they had to develop a strategy around how they were going to be supportive. And so they educated themselves on Flint and also on how lead is in several other urban cities around the country. But then they came up with the incredible idea of organizing a talent show. And the cost of admission was what the people in Flint said they wanted: baby wipes, water, and hand sanitizer, right? And so in order for people to get into the talent show, they had to bring those materials. And we organized a rider truck full of supplies that we took down to Flint. The young people volunteered, and that was part of their educational experience. And so I think that, again, restorative justice, and I mean a culture of restorative justice, not just a peace circle here, a peer jury there, I think is important. And then student leadership development, right? So those are the two things that I think should replace those police that are in schools.
Yeah. And this next question can actually be for both, Jitu, for both you and Diane. It's from David Bloom. And David asks, what are some ways integration helps alleviate suffering? And thoughts on busing as opposed to so-called school choice?
Diane,
well, I think Jitu and I probably disagree about this because we had a meeting in Louisville, and Jitu says the time for busing and is past. I strongly believe that we need to work towards having an integrated society because as long as people of color are segregated and they're liable to be persecuted, and this kinds of injustices that Jitu has described are likelier to happen. And I think one of the very powerful things about public education is having a school where children are of different races and ethnicities and religions and cultures, and where they come to understand that people who are different from themselves are all human. And Jitu talked earlier about building a human culture. And I think that's what we're missing in this country, is the idea that everybody counts, everybody matters. And I think that the more we know of one another, the less we'll be afraid. And the more we have a distance, the harder it is to see the other. So I'm not speaking for Jitu, I'm speaking for me.
So I think it's important to understand that I believe in having the right to integration. I believe that our children should play together. They should learn together. I also believe that Black children don't have to go to school with white children to be successful, to have excellent educational opportunities, to understand that inequity will happen if we accept it. If somebody kicks in the door of my house and threatens to harm my family, I'm not just gonna have an opinion about it, I'm gonna fight, right? And that's same for anybody that's on this call. Will we do the same for racial justice? Will we take the same stance for racial justice? See, we have accepted racism, that's my point. We've accepted it. We don't like it, but we've accepted it. That's what George Floyd is showing you. There is no more accepting it. So I have worked in and I have seen schools that were predominantly Black that were amazing schools. Amazing schools. I went to one as a child called Wendell Smith Elementary School. I had teachers that looked like me. I had a diverse teacher. I had white teachers. I had a Latinx teacher, but the majority of the teachers looked like me. They believed in me. They understood me. They challenged me. When I was in 4th grade, my teacher, Miss Coleman, for the first time told me I was brilliant. I'm 50, how old am I? I'm 54. And I remember that as a little boy, and she put me in a poetry contest as a child, right? She believed in me, she knew me, she understood me. She saw my mother at the grocery store, right? So yes, I believe we should have the right to integration, but it is not that what's segregated is not the human beings, but the access to resources and opportunity. Mm-hmm. That's what we must be at. We must be at war against that. So if we do that, then Black people aren't coming to situations like with our hands out. We don't want charity, we want solidarity, right? Nobody in this country has forgiven more evil, has fought through more than my people, and with the exception of Native American families. I mean, we know how to persevere. We know how to deal with stress. We know how to get hurt and keep on going. We know how to take the scraps from Master's table and make meals for our families. We've done this, right? We're in my neighborhood right now, on fire, it's the people in the community that are sweeping up in the streets. Like in Hurricane Maria, after the government turned its back on Puerto Rico, and the US government and the Puerto Rican government turned their backs on Puerto Rico, it was those teachers and those parents that began rebuilding schools. Mm-hmm. So the issue is not who we go to school with. The issue is the racism that would deny it for any child. What could be more evil than to look at a 3rd grader and sabotage their education? What's more horrible than that? A baby that still has imaginary friends. And I have a saying, and I said this to the people yesterday when we were meeting with the Latino families about jumping on Black people. I was like, I understand your pain. I said, but I want you to understand that every shooter, which means a kid that would shoot somebody, was once in 3rd grade. What was their experience? Were they called stupid? Did they learn anything about their history and culture? Did they have access to world language? Did they ever go on field trips? Did anybody ever tell them, like Miss Coleman told me, baby, you're brilliant? I see Miss Coleman's face right now. The woman had braids. She had the big circular glasses, and she used to smoke the little Moore cigarettes. I don't know if y'all remember the little Moore cigarettes. So Miss Coleman, well, she was a wonderful teacher. And we were embarrassed if we were at grade level when we graduated. All of us in my 8th grade were going to selective enrollment high schools. And this was right on the south side of Chicago, right? But when I was in school, I had a school band. I had a school newspaper in elementary school. I learned how to write news stories in grammar school. I learned Spanish. in the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, right? I learned, we had a business class. I learned entrepreneurship. But also during that time, when I walked down the street, I saw a person that owned a gas station that looked like me. I saw the corner store was not a liquor store ran by somebody from outside our community. It was a white hand pantry, like a 7-Eleven, owned by a man in my neighborhood. So we had a sense, see, what we have to understand, the main thing that has been snatched historically from Black people is our sense of identity, purpose, and direction. If someone else shapes your identity, then they will also shape your purpose. If they shape your purpose, they sure in the hell will shape your direction. And so what we're fighting for, see, I don't want to come to the table with Marla, with Diane. I am proud to be, I tell people all the time, I'm blacker than a million midnights. You walk in my house, all you see is statues, and I've studied my history, and et cetera, et cetera. That makes me no better and no worse than anybody else. We all have the right to be proud of who God made us. The same thing for our babies. Our babies have the right. The first thing you have to help a child understand is to be proud of who they are. If they are proud of who they are, that, you know, we say that education is inspiration and information that prepares one to make their way in the world, to impact the world. But it's inspiration first, right? When I first began working with youth, and I'll stop after this, we used to do this thing about, do you know who you are? And there was this picture of this little boy who stood in the mirror, poked his chest out. But when he looked in the mirror, he saw white Superman. Because the issue was that we have been taught to hate ourselves. We've been taught not to love who God made us, who the Creator made us. And so for me, I definitely believe we should have the right to integrate. I went to an integrated high school. I went to Kenwood Academy on the south side of Chicago, Kenwood Broncos. And the school was integrated, right? But I was prepared for that experience at an all-Black high school on the south, all-Black elementary school on the south side of Chicago.
Well, I have to say, Jitu, I think that Miss Coleman was right. She pegged you just right. She saw your talent and she gave you inspiration, and you've never stopped.
I love you too, Diane. Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
It's so
I need that. I need that today.
Yeah, it's a difficult time, and you're.
Yeah.
I know you're in a lot of demand, and you were getting a lot of press calls. So we're very grateful that you took this time to talk to us, and we've learned so much from you, and we're grateful. We're grateful for you. Thank you,
Diane, and I'm grateful for you all. And nothing is better than to have friends that you can talk about a better world with. Marla, I love you deeply. I appreciate you. Thank you so much. Can I make one announcement?
Absolutely.
Or plea? Okay, so I was trying to share the pictures, but one of the things we're doing in the Journey for Justice Alliance is we're doing a project called Justice Serves. We're doing mutual aid in several cities around the country. At Cocoa in Chicago, it's a youth-led effort that we're doing at a neighborhood church, Kenwood United Church of Christ. We do social distancing. We use the church. We have about 30 volunteers. We've given out well over 2,000 bags of fresh fruits and vegetables and meats, and then a bag of emergency supplies to seniors in the Bronzeville community. We are duplicating that effort right now in about 12 cities. And we're asking folks, if you find it in your heart, to please make a donation to the Journey for Justice Alliance to help support that mutual aid work. And also you can donate to the Schott Foundation for School Reform's Loving Cities Rapid Response Fund. Or you can just make a donation to the Journey for Justice Alliance on our website at www.j4jalliance.com. One of the things we're realizing, like right now, we don't have any grocery stores in our neighborhood. So the relationship that we have with different farmers and food depositories is how we're making sure our people get fed. And we're going to, eventually this is going to transition into a Saturday academy where young people are leading that effort. And then the elders and the parents in the community are driving the bags to the people's homes and delivering the bags to them and things of that nature. It is really an amazing process. And I think it's something that's sustainable. So we need our friends to support if you can. Again, that's www.j4jalliance.com or you can go to the Shot Foundation for School Reform's webpage, to their Loving Cities Rapid Response Fund. And that's it.
Thank you so much for joining us tonight, Jitu. And if you send me those links, we'll add that to all the materials we put out afterwards with the video, so people make sure that they have those links
Yes,
when they
ma'am.
get on to watch this amazing video. And I have to say, you have a remarkable ability to make an hour and a half feel like 5 minutes. And I don't know how you did that. But
All right.
thank you so much for
No
joining us
worries.
tonight and being here with us. And we look forward to speaking with you again. Be well,
Thank
everyone.
you. All right.
Thank
You
you.
all take care.
Bye-bye.